Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by SpeedStream. I'm Jim Cardle. The Texas economy may be approaching 50 months of straight economic growth, but nationally the markets are confounding the pundits and as unfulfilling and frustrating for investors as many can remember. Marc Flaster is a founding principal with Sandler and O'Neill Partners out of New York City and an advisor to hundreds of Texas banks, is in town for the Texas Bankers Association Chief Financial Officers annual meeting, and we're glad to be able to visit today with Sandler and O'Neill's Marc Flaster. Hi Marc, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's good to be here again.
You have been out and across the state since we last visited, and as I mentioned, you're now here in Austin to visit with the Texas Bankers Association Chief Financial Officers. GDP has been marked downward since we last met. I'm sure there's many topics of discussion at the conference. Tell us what you're hearing and what's the lay of the land economically these days.
Well, Jim, again, we've been together twice now. This is, I guess, my third opportunity to chat with you. I think in the last two commentaries, I made one theme consistent. I want to just remind our viewers of a couple of things that I see that I feel are not being properly represented.
Okay.
First of all, one, we are not in a recession. We're not going into recession. The economy is struggling along. Secondly, all the talk about inflation is a hype to encourage people to think, that is there because our managers of our money supply and economy don't know how to deal with deflation. In fact, Bernanke, who was considered a student of deflation, said in more opportunity than once that he didn't know how to deal with it. So he had to encourage people to think that there was some inflationary bias.
You're talking about former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke.
Ben Bernanke, yes. Now, let's just look at what's happened here. The stock market at the crash went down to 6,700. It's now at 16,700 or something close to that. In that 10,000 points, although the stock market improved, we didn't see much improvement in the economy. The economy itself is struggling somewhere around 2% growth. This last year, it was on average for the year 1.9. Year before that was 2.3. This year, I don't know what the end number is going to be, but I doubt if it would be too much over 2%. We started this first quarter of this year at a minus number. It was revised even further down to -1 full percentage point, and there's talk that it might be revised down even further. Then you have all the economists and those people say they know, said, oh, there's going to be a spring awakening, there's going to be a rush, people, cabin people are going to run out, and they're going to buy all the things that they didn't, and we're finding out, of course, that's not true at all. And we have some improvement on some sectors, but for the most part, people are still very cautious. They're careful with their money. They're not spending. They're paying down debt. The only area of the country of the economy that has, from the consumer side, that it shows promise is auto sales, and that's because the auto companies self-fund their borrowers, because borrowers can't buy, consumers can't borrow in the markets. The banks are struggling, or not, are restricted in the way that they are now required to manage their lending. So it's very difficult for a bank. We'll put it this way: banks are very cautious in who they lend to and how they lend. Now, this leaves us in an economy that is kind of bifurcated. It's kind of interesting that we're looking at a energy, almost a tsunami in this country. All of a sudden, it's almost the gold rush of the 1849s all over again, except this time it's oil out of or energy out of the ground.
Based out of Texas, I might add, as we're now, I'm sure you know, the largest producer of natural gas.
And it's in the job opportunities in the country, when they look and say where the jobs are, they're all in the energy producing areas where these finds are. They're in North Dakota, in the Balkan field. They're in western Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in the Utica finds. They're in the Marcellus area, over in towards eastern Texas and Louisiana, and of course down here in the
Eagle Ford
Shale area. That's beyond what has been found in the older Texas oil fields in West Texas, which are being refurbished because of new technologies, and they're being able with lateral drilling and the like. They're able to find recover, let's put it that way, a lot more oil than they had in the past. So all this talk about that the U.S. is running out of energy and energy resources is being pushed aside, and now the new thought is how do we manage all this wonderful opportunity, and what does it mean for us in world markets? And that is going to change the whole landscape of how we deal with our energy partners.
Well, you mentioned a couple things there I want to drill down into, not the oil and gas industry, but car purchases are driving a part of the economy, or a strong sector of the economy, because the auto companies can finance the loans. How about in particular, though, if we can get into the housing market borrowings and student loan markets have been in the news here the last week, with Senator Warren out of Massachusetts saying we ought to tax millionaires to allow student loans to be forgiven for the poor students. But first of all, I believe you mentioned that 50% of the houses that are being sold right now are with cash. Texas may be experiencing a strong housing market, but it's a reflection of the overall economy. What are you seeing in the housing market and student loans, perhaps?
Well, let's deal with the housing market first.
Okay.
The ugly part of this recovery is that in every recovery that we've been faced with in the past, the economy has always had some fits and starts for one reason or another. And the banking system has been able to allocate credit wherever they found that it was efficient for them, and without any restrictions. The oversight from the regulators was to make sure they accounted for it correctly, and they didn't get their safety and soundness was held to a higher level of repute. Now, this time around, because of what happened with the mortgage market, Congress stepped in, and we're not going to get too far down the road on Congress and their level.
There's been a lot going on this week,
and their level of
last
knowledge,
couple weeks.
But they went and said we need to protect the consumer, and so what we're going to do is we're going to put Dodd-Frank, we put severe rules in place that are going to restrict the banks, but they are the enemy. They're the ones that caused all this to happen. They allowed the voter, the homeowner, the consumer to go beyond their own means. We're going to make sure that we're going to protect those people. Now, you can't do that. So what they did is basically they shut down the credit file. So no credit can be issued or allowed to be without severe documentation and constraints. So you have banks who normally would be in the credit creation area at their will and freedom are now faced with government oversight that's very intense, and so they're being cautious and careful, and the resources that then took these loans and put them in the secondary market, for a lot of that has been removed by the government, and some of the other sectors have become very difficult to access.
And you're right, even this week, New York Senator Chuck Schumer, a key leader of the Democrat Senate, has been demagoguing the banks and talking about them being the evil ones who are forcing money on people or making them repay their debts. It's a problem for lending institutions which are required to keep the economy going.
Yes, so here you have one of the chief ingredients to provide the elixir for an economy that's basically being put in jail. So, and they haven't been able to put in jail, so they turn around and they fine them, and they fine them not a little bit, but they fine them billions and billions of dollars. And then each time they collect the money, I don't know where it went, because I didn't see a check, I don't think you did either. But wherever the money went, they turn around and say, well, that wasn't enough, and we come back on some other different act and find them some more. Today we're dealing with the Bank of America is faced with a $13 billion fine for mortgage transactions that they were not personally involved with, and they said, well, that was enough, we're going to raise that to $18 billion, and there's talk that the number might go to $20 billion for no other reason than just to make sure that they know that that's going to hurt. We're going to make sure it hurts. And what have they done to the company? Well, on the other side, they say all banks have to carry more capital. At the same time, they're busy penalizing them in the business that's going to help them create income and therefore capital. So the whole economy is being constrained. You can't have an economy grow when you keep on pulling back all the strings that should be released. So that's the one problem. Let's talk about that. Go with the other side of that is that
student loans.
The student loans is an interesting gambit, because we struggle with the word middle class. We don't understand what middle class means. Does middle class mean job? Does middle class mean income? If you make $50,000 a year, family income, is that a middle class income? Or are you a middle class person?
And it's often talked about as if it's static. People do not move from upper class to middle class, or from middle class to upper class, or through
Yeah, but depending where you live, you know, in New York, 50,000 is just about enough to get you on the subway. So, you know, people who make 100 or 110 or 15 or 25 would consider themselves also economically challenged, and they would call themselves yes. Then they say, I'm middle class. I'm not at that upper echelon that you talk about, buying those fancy apartments on the 37th floor at $38 million. Okay. But the point is, and this is a very important point to recognize, is that after the Second World War, and I know I'm taking far afield from where you started. Okay?
This is all right.
After the Second World War, okay, after every war, every country had experienced a recession because you had all this war material focus, and now it was over. There was no more building. You made bullets and you made tanks and whatever, and they rusted away. Okay. This time, due to a wonderful idea from Marshall, that the United States decided to go and rebuild Europe. So all those people that came out of our army, those millions that came back to the U.S., had jobs to produce material that was then sent and sold abroad to rebuild Europe.
Okay.
A tremendous impetus to our U.S. economy. So instead of the U.S. economy faltering with the recession that would come after war, we were actually energized, and we built this. We had this tremendous manufacturing business that was going on, and when the war was over, we not only had the manufacturing, but we had the innovators. The innovators were over there carrying the guns and using them in a way that may not have been exactly purposefully, but now they knew what to do to make it better and to make the machines better. And so we had this tremendous growth in our economy, where we'll say that middle class income grew very rapidly. People were able to buy homes. The debt was easy to by the GI Bill and the like was easy to obtain, and the housing market did very well. And the economy, the U.S. economy, ended up, as we know now, to being the greatest economy in the world.
Now we've got the European Union in quite a different state of economic
now
status.
we don't have a manufacturing cycle to resource the way we had before. The world has become more interdependent. We source manufactured goods all over the world wherever they're cheapest. We have trade negotiations with all the major partners trying to establish where the cheapest resource of production is. Today you can produce anything anywhere and ship it someplace else cheaper than you could produce at the site where it's being sold. In addition to that, you have many countries that can't afford to have their people in Tiananmen Square or in the street, and so they let them produce product, or encourage them to produce product, and they sell it below cost in the world so that they can keep these machineries going and keep these people out of the street. Because when they're in the street, as we've seen, it's a volatile situation, and the political parties can't afford, management can't afford to have their country in distress, and so they try to keep the people busy. That's one way to do it. So we've seen here in the U.S., manufacturing as part of our GDP has gone down from 25–26% to 11%, and in some industries it's as low as 8%. Okay, we see tremendous innovation. We see tremendous movement into technology in CAD, CAM, and the like to become more efficient to compete against these other countries that are bringing things in a different modular sequence, lower cost basis in employment. We've even seen some change in product coming back to the United States, producers coming back to the United States, because they found that with all these innovations, like, they can control the product quality better here than dealing with the way it was. But at the end of the day, you still have this big void. You don't have that engine that is bringing people into that area where they can grow and become more satisfied in their ability to build for their own families. And so the struggle is at a very different level.
And I suspect you're also going to add that now the workforce, when you've got kids graduating from college or in their 20s, putting off going to work because the job's not right, the stress is too high.
Well, I would take it a little bit differently. Whether it be the current administration I'd like to lay it on the current administration, but whether we want to put it on the current administration or what happened before them, we've basically gone forward and said that education is the answer. Education will bridge you beyond that middle class trap and put you at the higher level.
Okay.
So we're going to encourage everyone to get an education, and we're going to leapfrog that piece that we just talked about, okay? That may or may not be there. Okay? And so then they turned around and said, well, the only way we can give the access to everybody is to give them the money to do it. So here, it's kind of interesting that we complained that the banks went and lent money to people who couldn't afford the houses. Now we have a government lending money to children who have no income, who have no job, who have nothing. All they're doing is they're attending college. You wonder why college prices, tuition prices went up, is because the government gave them the money to pay for it, and they said, well, the money's there, we'll just take it ourselves.
So we've got a student loan debt in the nation of over $1 trillion, I believe, is what you mentioned before we started here, and a 15% default rate. Well, how long can that go on, and how big of a problem is it going to be for Congress?
Well, default rates are when you're dealing with the government, there's no such thing as bad debt. So government loans money and then they forgive the debt. So they've done the same thing here. The interesting thing is, as we started to say earlier, is that the youngsters that have taken all this responsibility to take on the debt, whether they see it as a responsibility or not, that's another question, okay, is that now they step forward and say, in order to continue with their lives, because they're outside the shelter of the halls of ivy, they're going to have to go appeal to the banks for support to get forward into the housing market, into the car market, into the whatever else they have to do. They have to take on debt. Mm-hmm. This is debt that really they're going to have to perform for. They're going to have to service that debt. Forget about what the government gave them. And they're denied. And they're denied because the banker says, look at all the debt you have. You can't pay that. How are you going to pay me? And so it immediately shuts down all the entry level to that building block for home ownership and family formation and the things that have grown up with our economy. And it turns these people back to say, well, you, as a government, put me in this place. You take care of me.
So it's going to be a battle in the generations to come, or maybe not in the generations within the next 10 years. Folks, I want to thank you again for joining us. We're visiting with Marc Flaster from Sandler and O'Neill Partners out of New York City. Marc, one final question. We'll let you get back to your bankers conference. And speaking of these, segueing into these young people, they don't, as a result of some of this debt you're talking about, they don't build nest eggs. They are not buying homes, if I understand correctly. Talk about the future of investment and economic engine, stimulus, continued growth, if we see this too much longer, where folks 35 and under are not able to contribute in the economy.
Well, I think you have to separate that out and say, what is the Fed doing? And for the last 6 years, the Fed has been pumping money in, and they have a balance sheet of over $25 trillion, and it's getting bigger every day. And that money had to go somewhere. So what we end up with is, instead of having consumer price inflation, we ended up with asset-based inflation. So the stock market's gone up 10,000 points, as I mentioned. Real estate, commercial real estate has gone up in value. Homes in some areas have improved a bit. That's more from the consumer side. But from the commercial side and the business side, that has seen some big improvement. And quality, of course, of the debt has improved, which allowed for refinancing. So low interest rates on one side, and we're going to a place that's going to take a long time to discuss, so we'll have to end it here.
Okay.
But low interest rates have had the effect of allowing, on the commercial side, a lot of refinancing and improvement of the quality of the underlying debt that supports all these buildings here in Austin, Houston, and New York, and Florida. But on the other side, the bad part about all this is that the seniors, the group that has got more time on their hands than they like to have been living off the interest rate that was earned on the monies they'd saved, and that those monies are earning nothing. And so they're frustrated, and they're scared. And of course, when they're scared, where they turn to government. So, and where's government standing? With the hands open. So you could say there's a whole conspiracy here to force people to turn more towards government, to ask government to be the answer. And the government then is arguing amongst themselves of how much of this that they can absorb. But at the end of the day, they're going to absorb all of it because our representative government is all about votes. We're coming up with elections right now, and we talked a little bit about what happened in Virginia, and they see this large mass of people that is reaching out for their assistance, and they're going to say, give me your tired, your poor, we'll take it.
Well, speaking of the tired and the poor and turning the page,
which goes to health care and all that kind of stuff.
We're going to leave it there, and thank you for coming in, Mark, to give us the latest on the Texas economy and the U.S. national developments. We appreciate your time and hope you'll come back next
pleasure.
month.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Folks, we want to thank you as well for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV. Our guest has been Marc Flaster with Sandler and O'Neill Partners. And remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.